Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday morning, June 19th. Well, the Atlantic Basin tropical season is underway here. We have a couple of systems now to monitor, now located over the far eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean. It looks like the front-running system definitely will intensify into tropical storm status, perhaps even later today, if not today, overnight tonight or into the day tomorrow. It could very well reach hurricane status later on this week. However, beyond that time frame, probably by the upcoming weekend, it looks like it may weaken as it gets impacted by some wind shear in the central and eastern and western part of the Atlantic Ocean, and the upper air ridge pattern that I really like to take a look at here when we get into the tropical season over southeastern Canada, for example. It's not all that impressive for intensification. It's at least not in the medium term, like over the upcoming weekend. I think it may go under a weakening type of pattern. After that, all bets are off. It's just too far ahead. Maybe 10 days from now, maybe 10 to 15 days from now, the same system could undergo some intensification, but it looks like it has a good chance of staying away from the U.S. mainland. So again, we have two different systems right now. This front-runner system has an excellent chance of reaching tropical storm status over the next 24 to 48 hours or so, maybe even hurricane status later on this week. It's not exactly clear yet whether or not it'll spill out over into the Caribbean Sea. There's probably a better than even chance that this system ends up scooting to the north and east and out into this part of the Atlantic Ocean later on this week. Second system, less of a chance of reaching tropical storm status, certainly something we'll keep an eye on. But again, the tropics are alive, and we have a system that absolutely should reach tropical storm status and likely hurricane status before it undergoes some potential weakening during the upcoming weekend. Well, before we take a look at some of the weather maps, let's take another look here at the sea surface temperature anomalies, both in the Pacific Ocean area and the Atlantic Basin. We have El Nino underway right now. We have warmer than normal conditions, especially off the west coast of South America, but it's kind of spilling westward right across the equator. This horizontal line right here represents the equator latitude of 0 degrees. And really, the El Nino got underway right off the west coast of South America. And in recent weeks, it's kind of been much more noticeable at the surface along the equator, kind of spreading west along the equator. Now, El Nino tends to be unfavorable for tropical storm activity in the Atlantic Basin, as it tends to increase wind shear. And in fact, there may be increased wind shear later on this week into the weekend that could tend to weaken this particular front-running system. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic Ocean, a lot of warmer than normal conditions all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico into the Caribbean Sea. This, of course, is a favorable factor, so kind of contradictory signals here from the sea surface temperatures, with El Nino in the Pacific Ocean more of an unfavorable factor for Atlantic tropical activity, but the Atlantic Ocean itself favorable with these warmer than normal conditions. These two systems right now, right in this region right here, where in fact temperatures are above normal at the surface level here of the eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean. But again, this front-running system looks like it may end up going to about this position late in the week and during the upcoming weekend, and the combination of unfavorable upper air pattern, we'll take a look at the 500 millibar pattern next, combined with some increased wind shear, may lead to weakening after it possibly reaches hurricane status. Well, let's now take a look at the 0Z run of the GFS model. This is the operational version. We're looking here at the 500 millibar height anomalies. Now, this time of the year, I really like to focus in on southeastern Canada. If there is indeed a strong high pressure ridging over southeastern Canada, maybe even down to northern part of New England, it tends to be kind of a favorable factor for tropical systems to move from east to west into the southeastern U.S. or into the Gulf of Mexico or Caribbean Sea. There does start off this week with high pressure ridging over eastern Canada. In fact, intensifies for a short time, but then it really weakens by the time we get to the upcoming weekend. Let's take a look here. Notice here, orange showing up over the Hudson Bay region of Canada. That's higher heights than normal. That tends to be favorable sign for tropical activity to potentially reach the southeastern U.S., but we'll see that changes over the upcoming week. Trough over the southeastern part of the nation during the first part of this week, the Tennessee Valley. In fact, there will be a lot of moist conditions, rainfall down across the southeastern U.S., the Tennessee Valley over the next few days, and at times that moisture will push its way northward into the mid-Atlantic region. Now, watch what happens to this ridge. It does intensify in the short term. Here we go by midweek. Pretty strong ridge here over the Hudson Bay region of Canada. But we'll move forward here as we get to the latter part of the week. This is now the Friday morning forecast map. First of all, notice that ridge is already starting to weaken. It's kind of starting to break down. Here is a reflection of that tropical system at the 500 millibar level right here. Indeed, this particular forecast run has it not going into the Caribbean Sea, but turning to the north and east of the Windward Islands. And it does tend to slow down and likely weaken right in this particular position. Again, notice here, by the time we get to the middle and latter part of the weekend, not all that impressive in terms of an upper level ridge over southeastern part of Canada or the Canadian Maritime region. To me, that's kind of an unfavorable sign for this system. Yes, it can reach hurricane status, let's say, over the next 2, 3, 4 days, but I think some weakening is likely beyond that late this week or during the upcoming weekend. Again, not all that favorable in terms of the 500 millibar conditions here over eastern Canada when we get to the upcoming weekend. And again, increased wind shear could help to weaken this system as well during the upcoming weekend. Now, beyond that, it's just too early to say. This could meander around for a while and then strengthen again. But we're talking 10 to 15 days out, and it's just too early to say anything about that at this particular time. Now, let's wrap up by looking at the surface forecast maps. We'll take a look at two models here, the GFS from 0Z last night and the Canadian model as well. Again, a lot of moisture, upper level trough sitting right over the Tennessee Valley as we begin the week here on Monday, June 19th. Now, let's push forward rather quickly. And there is a lot of moisture here. At times, it'll push northward into the mid-Atlantic region. Here we are at Thursday morning forecast map, and now we could start to see a reflection at the surface here. 985 millibar low. That's that tropical system, likely the front-running tropical system, pushing to the north and east of the Windward Islands by Friday. Again, it can very well reach hurricane status by this time at the end of this work week here. Moisture all the way up into the mid-Atlantic region. But then after that, notice here we get into the upcoming weekend, and what was a 985 millibar tropical low kind of weakens to 1,001 here by the time we get to Sunday morning. Again, not all that impressive for intensification purposes with that upper level ridge over the eastern part of Canada, and also there'll be some wind shear likely to weaken this system over the upcoming weekend, and that is after, again, it could intensify over the next 2, 3, 4 days, perhaps even into hurricane status before the weakening takes place this weekend. Well, let's wrap up by taking a look at the Canadian model run. We'll see a pretty similar situation, I believe, with the Canadian model. We have a lot of moisture over the southeastern states for the next few days, and at times it could push northward into the mid-Atlantic region. Here we go by Thursday with rain pushing northward into the mid-Atlantic region. Again, trough, the upper parts of the atmosphere sitting and spinning over the southeastern states. And here is a reflection of that low here, a little bit closer to the Windward Islands, and the Canadian model actually crosses the Windward Islands into the Caribbean Sea. It stays down over the Caribbean Sea, but tends to weaken by the time we get to the upcoming weekend. Really, a 1008 millibar low in the central Caribbean by the time we get to Saturday morning. Not all that impressive in terms of the ridging up over southeastern Canada, at least at the 500 millibar level. So the path is not yet set in stone. The GFS has it kind of curving to the north and east of the Windward Islands, whereas the Canadian model tends to spill it out over into the Caribbean Sea by the upcoming weekend. But I think in either case, the likely scenario is for strengthening into tropical storm status over the next 12, 24, 48 hours or so, possibly then reaching hurricane status later this work week. But then after that, probably a weakening process at the end of this week or into the upcoming weekend, with the combination of two factors. First of all, weakening ridging aloft over southeastern Canada over the upcoming weekend, and likelihood of some increased wind shear over the southwestern part of the Atlantic Ocean, the western Atlantic Ocean. That's partly a reflection of the El Nino conditions over the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. So the tropics are alive, and we'll certainly monitor that here at arcfieldweather.com over the next several days. That's it for now. This has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.